Baby saw a bear. Cub trapped in a clothing store fitting room. What Baby did next fitted perfectly. The rain tapped against the windows of the small clothing boutique on Maple Street, creating a rhythm that seemed to slow down time itself. Jessica Brooks pushed the glass door open with her shoulder, maneuvering the stroller through the entrance while droplets of water slid down her umbrella. The bell above the door chimed softly, a gentle sound that barely disturbed the peaceful atmosphere inside. Her baby, Lily Morgan, sat quietly in the stroller, her tiny hands wrapped around a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. The store was nearly empty that Tuesday afternoon, with only the soft hum of the heating system and the distant sound of hangers sliding across racks breaking the silence. Jessica had been putting off this shopping trip for weeks. The changing seasons meant she needed new clothes, but finding time with a 6-month-old baby was never easy. Today, with the rain keeping most people indoors, and Lily in an unusually calm mood, seemed like the perfect opportunity. The boutique had that particular smell of new fabric mixed with vanilla candles, creating an atmosphere that was both comforting and slightly overwhelming. Ethan Marshall, the store owner, looked up from behind the counter where he had been organizing receipts. He was a man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a gentle smile that immediately put customers at ease. He nodded at Jessica, recognizing her from previous visits before Lily was born, when shopping trips were simpler affairs that didn't require military-level planning. The store itself was a cozy space, with exposed brick walls painted white and wooden floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. Racks of clothing were arranged by color rather than size, creating a rainbow effect that drew the eye from one section to another. Soft jazz played from speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling, the volume low enough that it felt more like a suggestion of music than an actual soundtrack. Jessica wheeled the stroller toward the women's section, parking it next to a full-length mirror where she could keep an eye on Lily while browsing. The baby seemed content, her large eyes taking in the new environment with that particular intensity that babies have when processing unfamiliar surroundings. As Jessica fingered through a rack of autumn sweaters, something peculiar happened. Lily, who had been quietly observing, suddenly turned her head toward the back of the store. Her movement was deliberate, focused, as if she had heard something that demanded her attention. Jessica noticed, but didn't think much of it at first. Babies were always looking at things adults couldn't see or understand, finding fascination in shadows, light patterns, or seemingly empty corners. But Lily's attention remained fixed, her tiny brow furrowing slightly as if she was concentrating on solving a puzzle only she could perceive. The sound, when Jessica finally heard it, was so faint she thought she might have imagined it. It was a soft scratching, barely audible above the ambient noise of the store. It came in irregular intervals, sometimes quick and desperate, other times slow and methodical. She paused, a burgundy cardigan still in her hand, and listened more carefully. There it was again, that strange scratching sound, coming from somewhere near the fitting rooms at the back of the store. Lily made a small noise, not quite a cry, but more of an announcement, as if she was trying to tell her mother that something important was happening. Jessica looked around the store, wondering if Ethan had heard it too. But he was now on the phone, speaking quietly to what sounded like a supplier about a delayed shipment. The scratching continued, and now Jessica could hear something else mixed in with it, a sound that was harder to identify. It was almost like breathing, but different somehow, more labored and irregular. She found herself moving toward the sound, pushing the stroller slowly, drawn by a curiosity she couldn't quite explain. The fitting rooms were located in a small alcove at the back of the store, 3 doors painted in a soft sage green with brass handles that had been worn smooth by countless hands over the years. The scratching was definitely coming from behind one of the doors, the middle one to be precise. Jessica stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Perhaps someone was in there and needed help, but why wouldn't they just call out or open the door? The store had been empty when she arrived, and she hadn't seen anyone else come in. Lily was now making more urgent sounds, little huffs and babbles that seemed to increase in intensity the closer they got to the fitting room door. Her small hands reached out toward the door, grasping at air, her whole body leaning forward in the stroller as much as the safety straps would allow. The rational part of Jessica's mind told her to get Ethan, to let him handle whatever was happening behind that door. But there was something about the quality of the sound, something vulnerable and frightened about it, that made her want to investigate herself. She knocked gently on the door, calling out softly to avoid startling whoever or whatever was inside. The scratching stopped immediately, replaced by a silence that seemed to hold its breath. Even Lily went quiet, as if she too was waiting to see what would happen next. Then, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, the scratching resumed, this time accompanied by a soft whimpering that made Jessica's heart skip a beat. She tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in her hand. The door swung open slowly, revealing a scene that made her gasp and take an involuntary step backward. There, huddled in the corner of the fitting room, was a small bear cub. It couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur dark brown with lighter patches around its ears and paws. The cub looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too human in their expression of fear and confusion. How it had gotten into the store, into this fitting room, was a complete mystery. The walls were solid, the ceiling intact, and the only entrance was the door Jessica had just opened. The cub made no move to attack or flee. Instead, it pressed itself further into the corner, making itself as small as possible. Jessica could see now that one of its paws was caught in what looked like a plastic security tag, the kind used on expensive clothing items. The tag had somehow wrapped around the cub's paw, and its attempts to remove it had only made the situation worse. The plastic had cut into the soft pad of its foot, and there were small spots of blood on the cream-colored carpet. The sight of the injured, frightened animal triggered something maternal in Jessica, the same instinct that made her check on Lily dozens of times throughout the night. But this was a wild animal, she reminded herself. Even if it was just a baby, bears, even small ones, could be dangerous, especially when frightened or in pain. She should call animal control, or the police, or someone who knew how to handle this situation. But before she could move, before she could even fully process what she was seeing, Lily did something extraordinary. The baby, who had been so focused on the fitting room door, now began making soft cooing sounds. They weren't the random babbles of a typical 6-month-old, but deliberate, almost musical notes that seemed designed to communicate comfort and safety. The effect on the bear cub was immediate and remarkable. Its tense body relaxed slightly, and it tilted its head, listening to Lily's sounds with what could only be described as interest. The two babies, one human and one ursine, seemed to be having a conversation that transcended species and language. Lily continued her soft vocalizations, and incredibly the cub responded with quiet huffs and gentle grunts. Jessica stood frozen, watching this impossible interaction unfold before her eyes. She had read about interspecies communication, had seen videos of unlikely animal friendships, but witnessing it firsthand, especially involving her own child, was something else entirely. Ethan must have finished his phone call because Jessica heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to see him walking toward them, his expression changing from casual interest to shock as he took in the scene. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid startling the cub. He asked what was happening, how a bear had gotten into his store, questions Jessica couldn't answer because she was just as confused as he was. But what struck both adults most was not the presence of the wild animal, but the way Lily and the cub seemed to be communicating. Ethan mentioned that he had been in the store since early morning, doing inventory and preparing new displays. He had checked all the fitting rooms multiple times throughout the day, and they had all been empty. The back door had been locked, the windows were sealed, and there was simply no logical explanation for how a bear cub could have entered the store and ended up trapped in a fitting room. Yet here it was, injured and frightened, somehow having materialized in this impossible location. The mystery deepened when Ethan noticed something else strange. The security tag wrapped around the cub's paw was from his store, but it was a model they had stopped using over 3 years ago. As they stood there, trying to make sense of the situation, Lily's interaction with the cub continued to evolve. She had begun reaching out her tiny hands, not grabbing or grasping, but offering, as if she wanted to share something with her new friend. The cub, still wary of the adults, seemed to trust Lily completely. It took a tentative step forward, limping slightly on its injured paw, moving closer to the stroller. Jessica's maternal instincts screamed at her to pull Lily away, to protect her baby from this wild animal, but something held her back. There was no aggression in the cub's movements, only curiosity and perhaps a recognition of kinship with another young creature. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing force. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the lights in the store flickered momentarily. The cub flinched at the sound, and Lily immediately responded with more soothing coos, as if she understood the animal's fear and was trying to provide comfort. It was then that Jessica noticed something she had missed before. Around the cub's neck was a thin collar, barely visible beneath its thick fur. It wasn't a typical pet collar, but something that looked handmade, woven from what appeared to be plant fibers. Attached to it was a small wooden tag with symbols carved into it, symbols that didn't look like any language Jessica recognized. Ethan carefully moved closer, speaking in soft, calm tones. He had grown up in the mountains, he explained, and had some experience with wildlife. He could see that the cub was dehydrated and had been separated from its mother for some time. The injury to its paw, while not life-threatening, needed attention. But the biggest mystery remained. How had it gotten here? The nearest forest was over 50 miles away, and the store was in the middle of a busy shopping district. Even if someone had brought the cub here deliberately, which seemed unlikely given the locked fitting room and the old security tag, why would they do such a thing? As if sensing the adult's confusion, Lily became more animated in her communication with the cub. She babbled excitedly, her sounds taking on different tones and rhythms. The cub responded in kind, and for a moment it seemed as if they were sharing secrets that no adult could understand. Then something even more extraordinary happened. Lily, who had only recently learned to grasp objects properly, reached for her stuffed rabbit. With surprising coordination for a 6-month-old, she held it out toward the cub, offering her most prized possession to this strange new friend. The cub approached slowly, sniffing the air cautiously. When it was close enough, it gently touched its nose to the stuffed rabbit, then looked at Lily with what could only be described as gratitude. The simple exchange brought tears to Jessica's eyes. Here was her baby, barely half a year old, showing more compassion and understanding than many adults she knew. The species barrier that should have made them afraid of each other simply didn't exist for these two young souls. They saw each other not as potential threats, but as kindred spirits, both young, both vulnerable, both in need of comfort and companionship. Ethan had been quietly making phone calls while Jessica watched the interaction. he had contacted a wildlife rehabilitation center about an hour away, explaining the situation as best he could. The person on the other end of the line had been skeptical at first, thinking it was a prank call. Bears in clothing stores simply didn't happen, especially not in fitting rooms that had been locked from the inside with no apparent way for the animal to have entered. But Ethan's sincere tone and detailed description eventually convinced them to send someone to investigate. They would arrive within the hour, he reported, and would know how to safely handle the cub and treat its injury. While they waited, the strange communion between Lily and the cub continued. The baby had somehow managed to convey that the adults meant no harm, and the cub had relaxed considerably. It even allowed Ethan to carefully examine the security tag on its paw, though it kept its eyes on Lily the entire time, as if drawing courage from her presence. Ethan worked slowly and carefully, using small scissors from his tailor's kit to cut away the plastic without causing further injury. The cub whimpered once or twice, but each time Lily would make her soothing sounds, and the animal would calm down. As Ethan worked, he told Jessica about old legends he had heard growing up. Stories about animals appearing in impossible places as messengers or tests. His grandmother, who had lived her entire life in the mountains, used to say that sometimes the universe sent us exactly what we needed to learn important lessons, even if the delivery method defied logic. Jessica had never been one for superstition or folklore, but watching her baby daughter communicate with a bear cub in the back of a clothing store on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, she found herself reconsidering her skepticism. The security tag finally came free, and the cub immediately began licking its injured paw. The wound wasn't as bad as it had initially appeared, though it would definitely need proper medical attention. Ethan found a bowl in the store's small break room and filled it with water, placing it near the cub. The animal drank gratefully, its pink tongue lapping up the water with obvious relief. Lily watched with fascination, clapping her hands together in what seemed like approval. The simple act of providing water to a thirsty animal had filled the room with an almost palpable sense of rightness, as if this was exactly what was supposed to happen. As they waited for the wildlife experts to arrive, Jessica found herself thinking about the strangeness of the situation. Not just the impossibility of the cub's presence, but the timing of it all. She had almost canceled this shopping trip 3 times that morning. Lily had been fussy at breakfast. The weather was terrible, and Jessica herself had been feeling under the weather. But something had compelled her to come anyway, to be in this specific place at this specific time. If they hadn't been here, if Lily hadn't heard those faint scratching sounds, the cub might have remained trapped indefinitely, injured and alone. The collar around the cub's neck continued to puzzle her. She asked Ethan if she could look at it more closely, and he agreed, though he cautioned her to move slowly and carefully. The cub, now more trusting thanks to Lily's continued presence, allowed Jessica to examine the collar. The symbols carved into the wooden tag were intricate and beautiful, looking almost like a combination of different ancient scripts. Some reminded her of Norse runes, others of Native American petroglyphs, and still others seemed completely unique. The wood itself was unusual, with a grain pattern she had never seen before, and a faint scent that reminded her of deep forests and old magic. Ethan photographed the collar and tag with his phone, planning to research the symbols later. He had a friend who was an anthropologist at the local university, who might be able to identify them. The mystery of how the cub had arrived in his store was deepening rather than resolving, each new detail adding another layer of impossibility to an already impossible situation. Yet, despite the strangeness of it all, there was something profoundly right about what was happening. The connection between Lily and the cub felt like something that was meant to be, a meeting that had been arranged by forces beyond human understanding. The wildlife rehabilitation team arrived exactly an hour after Ethan's call, their van pulling up outside the store just as the rain was beginning to lighten. The team consisted of 2 people, Michael Hayes, a veterinarian who specialized in wild animals, and Savannah Reed, a wildlife biologist who had worked with bears for over a decade. They entered the store with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, clearly still not entirely convinced that there was actually a bear cub in a clothing store fitting room. Their expressions changed quickly when they saw the scene before them. A baby bear sitting calmly next to a human baby's stroller, the 2 youngsters seemingly engaged in their own private conversation. Savannah approached slowly, her trained eye taking in every detail of the situation. She noted the cub's age, probably around 4 months old, its general health, which seemed good despite the dehydration and injured paw, and most surprisingly, its calm demeanor around humans. Wild bear cubs, even young ones, were typically terrified of people, having been taught by their mothers to avoid human contact at all costs. Yet, this cub showed no signs of the usual fear response. Instead, it seemed almost comfortable, especially around Lily. Michael began his examination of the cub, checking its vital signs and assessing the injury to its paw. He worked with practiced efficiency, his hands gentle but firm. The cub allowed the examination without protest, though it kept looking at Lily, as if seeking reassurance. The baby girl continued her soft vocalizations, and remarkably the cub's heart rate, which Michael was monitoring, remained steady and calm. He mentioned that he had never seen anything like it in his 20 years of working with wildlife. Usually, even sedated animals showed signs of stress when being examined, but this cub was as relaxed as a house pet. The collar presented another mystery. Savannah examined it carefully, taking multiple photographs and even collecting a small sample of the fiber for analysis. She had seen many tracking collars and identification tags on wild animals, but nothing like this. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the symbols unlike anything in her extensive knowledge of indigenous cultures and their relationships with wildlife. She wondered aloud if perhaps the cub had escaped from some sort of private collection or exotic animal sanctuary, though that didn't explain how it had ended up locked in a fitting room with no apparent means of entry. As the professionals worked, they shared their own theories about the situation. Michael suggested that perhaps the cub had been living in the building's ventilation system, though a quick examination of the vents in the fitting room showed they were far too small for even a young cub to fit through. Savannah wondered if someone had deliberately placed the cub there as some sort of statement or protest, though the locked door and the old security tag made that seem unlikely. Neither could explain the collar or the strange bond between the cub and Lily. The decision was made to transport the cub to the rehabilitation center where it could receive proper medical care and be evaluated for eventual release back into the wild. But as they prepared to leave, something touching happened. The cub, which had been so calm and cooperative, suddenly became agitated when it realized it was being separated from Lily. It made soft, plaintive sounds, reaching out with its uninjured paw toward the stroller. Lily responded immediately, her own sounds taking on a distressed quality that Jessica had never heard before. The 2 babies were clearly upset about being separated. Savannah suggested something unusual. She proposed that Jessica and Lily accompany them to the rehabilitation center, at least for the initial settling-in period. It was unconventional, she admitted, but the bond between the baby and the cub was clearly special, and maintaining that connection, at least temporarily, might help the cub adjust to its new environment. Jessica found herself agreeing immediately, despite the logical part of her brain pointing out all the reasons why taking her 6-month-old daughter to a wildlife rehabilitation center was not a normal Tuesday afternoon activity. The drive to the center took them out of the city and into the countryside. The rain had stopped completely, and shafts of sunlight broke through the clouds, creating a golden light that made everything look almost magical. Lily and the cub traveled in separate vehicles for safety reasons, but at every red light, Jessica could see the wildlife van ahead of them, and she knew that somehow Lily could sense her friend was near. The baby remained unusually quiet during the drive, but it wasn't the silence of sleep or contentment. It was the quiet of anticipation, of waiting for something important to happen. The rehabilitation center was a sprawling complex of buildings and enclosures nestled at the base of a mountain. It was a place where injured and orphaned wildlife were brought to heal and, when possible, be returned to their natural habitat. The staff there had been briefed on the unusual circumstances of the cub's discovery, and a small group had gathered to witness this strange case. As the vehicles pulled up, Jessica could see the curiosity on their faces, the skepticism mixed with wonder at the story they had been told. The cub was carefully transported to an examination room, and true to Savannah's suggestion, Jessica and Lily were allowed to accompany it. The room was bright and clean, with medical equipment designed specifically for treating wild animals. The cub was placed on an examination table, and once again, the presence of Lily seemed to keep it calm. Michael began a more thorough examination, taking blood samples and x-rays, cleaning and bandaging the injured paw. Through it all, Lily watched with intense focus, occasionally making her soft sounds when the cub seemed distressed. The initial test results were puzzling. The cub was healthy overall, but there were some unusual findings. Its blood work showed markers that didn't quite match the typical profile for a black bear cub of its age. There were trace elements in its system that Michael couldn't immediately identify, requiring more sophisticated analysis. The x-rays revealed something even stranger, what appeared to be a small metallic object near the cub's heart. It wasn't a bullet or any kind of injury, but rather something that seemed to have been there since birth, integrated into the tissue in a way that should have been impossible. While the medical team puzzled over these findings, Jessica found herself drawn to study the collar more closely. In the better light of the examination room, she could see details she had missed before. The symbols weren't just carved into the wood, they seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they had been inlaid with some kind of iridescent material. When she touched the collar gently, she felt a slight warmth, almost like a pulse. It was probably her imagination, she told herself, but the sensation was unmistakable. The collar felt alive somehow, connected to something larger than just this small, frightened cub. Connor Adams, the center's director, arrived to assess the situation personally. He was a man who had dedicated his life to wildlife conservation, and in his 30 years of experience, he had seen many strange things. But this, he admitted, was unprecedented. A bear cub appearing in a locked room with no explanation, wearing a collar that defied identification and sharing an inexplicable bond with a human infant. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale rather than a typical Tuesday at the rehabilitation center. Yet here it was, real and undeniable. As the afternoon wore on, more tests were conducted and more mysteries emerged. The fiber of the collar was analyzed and found to be from a plant that the botanist on staff couldn't identify. It had characteristics of several known species, but matched none of them exactly. The wooden tag was made from a type of wood that similarly defied classification. Carbon dating on a small sample suggested it was both very old and very new simultaneously, a paradox that the lab technician insisted must be due to equipment error, though repeated tests yielded the same impossible results. The bond between Lily and the cub continued to fascinate everyone present. When it was time for the cub to be moved to a temporary enclosure, Lily became distressed again. This time, Jessica had an idea. She asked if she could leave Lily's stuffed rabbit with the cub, thinking it might provide some comfort. The staff agreed, though they warned that the cub might destroy the toy. But when the rabbit was placed in the enclosure with the cub, the young bear treated it with surprising gentleness, curling up with it as if it were a treasured possession. As the day drew to a close, Jessica knew they needed to leave. Lily needed her normal routine, her familiar surroundings, her regular nap and feeding schedule. But leaving felt wrong somehow, like abandoning a friend in need. Savannah assured her that they could visit, that the bond between Lily and the cub was something worth preserving and studying. She gave Jessica her personal phone number, promising to send updates on the cub's progress and to let them know when visits would be possible. The drive home was quiet, with Lily falling asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day. Jessica's mind raced with questions and wonder at what had transpired. She thought about calling her husband, trying to explain over the phone that their daughter had somehow befriended a bear cub that had mysteriously appeared in a clothing store fitting room. It sounded absurd, even in her own head. How could she expect anyone who hadn't witnessed it to believe such a story? That evening, as Jessica put Lily to bed, she noticed something different about her daughter. The baby seemed older somehow, as if the day's events had awakened something within her. Her eyes held a depth of understanding that hadn't been there before. When Jessica sang her usual lullaby, Lily responded with some of the same sounds she had made to the cub, as if she was trying to share her new language with her mother. It was beautiful and slightly unsettling. This evidence that her baby had experienced something profound that Jessica could only partially understand. Over the next few days, life returned to something resembling normal. Though Jessica found herself constantly thinking about the cub. Savannah called with regular updates. The cub was adjusting well, its paw was healing nicely, and it still slept with Lily's stuffed rabbit every night. The mysterious metallic object near its heart remained a puzzle, showing up on scans but seeming to cause no harm. The collar had been sent to various experts for analysis, but no one could definitively identify its origin or meaning. A week after their first encounter, Jessica and Lily returned to the rehabilitation center for a visit. The reunion between the baby and the cub was touching to witness. They immediately began their strange communication again, picking up as if no time had passed. The cub had grown slightly in the week since they'd seen it, but its affection for Lily remained unchanged. The staff had named it Luna, after the crescent moon shape of one of the symbols on its collar, though they all agreed that somehow Lily seemed to know its real name, speaking it in her babbling language that only the cub understood. During this visit, something remarkable happened. Haley Dawson, a graduate student studying animal behavior who had been observing Luna all week, had set up recording equipment to capture the vocalizations between Lily and the cub. When she analyzed the recordings later, she discovered patterns that suggested a genuine form of communication. The sounds weren't random. They had structure, repetition, and what appeared to be responses to specific stimuli. It wasn't a language in the traditional sense, but it was definitely meaningful exchange. The discovery attracted attention from the academic community. Researchers from the nearby university wanted to study the phenomenon, to understand how a human infant and a bear cub could develop what appeared to be a shared communication system. But Jessica was protective of her daughter, wary of turning Lily into a science experiment. She agreed to limited observation, but only if it didn't interfere with the genuine friendship between the two babies. The bond they shared felt sacred somehow, something that shouldn't be dissected and analyzed too thoroughly. As weeks turned into months, the visits continued. Luna grew stronger and larger, beginning to look more like the powerful predator it would one day become. But around Lily, it remained gentle and playful, never showing any sign of aggression. Lily, too, was growing, starting to crawl and then taking her first tentative steps. Her first clear word wasn't mama or dada, as Jessica had expected, but something that sounded like Luna, though spoken with an inflection that made it sound like so much more than just a name. The mystery of Luna's appearance in the clothing store was never solved. Security footage from nearby businesses showed no sign of anyone carrying a bear cub through the streets. The store's own cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that day, recording nothing but static during the crucial hours. The collar remained an enigma, its symbols refusing to yield their secrets despite extensive study. Some suggested it was an elaborate hoax, but too many credible witnesses had seen the impossible circumstances of Luna's discovery for that explanation to hold water. Logan Carter, a local journalist who had been following the story, wrote a series of articles about the unusual friendship. He was careful to stick to the facts, avoiding sensationalism, but even the bare truth was extraordinary enough to capture widespread attention. Letters and emails poured in from around the world, some from people claiming to have had similar experiences with inexplicable animal encounters, others from those who saw in the story evidence of everything from divine intervention to extraterrestrial influence. Through it all, Jessica tried to maintain some semblance of normal life for Lily, but she couldn't deny that her daughter had been changed by the experience. Lily showed an unusual empathy for all living things, crying when she saw injured birds, trying to comfort upset dogs at the park. She seemed to understand animals in a way that went beyond typical childhood affection for creatures. It was as if her encounter with Luna had opened a door in her consciousness, allowing her to perceive and connect with the natural world in ways others couldn't. The rehabilitation center faced a dilemma as Luna grew. Typically, the goal was to release rehabilitated animals back into the wild as soon as they were healthy enough to survive on their own. But Luna's case was different. The cub had been so young when found, with no memory of life in the wild. It had been raised with significant human contact, particularly with Lily. There were concerns about whether it could ever truly adapt to life in the forest. Moreover, there was the mystery of its origin. Without knowing where Luna had come from, how could they know where to release it? The decision was made to keep Luna at the center indefinitely, in a large, naturalistic enclosure that would allow it to express natural behaviors while remaining safe and cared for. It wasn't ideal, everyone agreed, but it seemed like the best option given the unusual circumstances. A special viewing area was created where Lily could visit safely as Luna grew larger and stronger. The bond between them remained, though it evolved as they both matured. As Lily grew older and began to talk more clearly, she tried to explain her connection with Luna, but the words never quite captured what she felt. She said Luna was her friend, but it was more than that. She said they talked, but not with words. She said Luna had come from far away, but not in the way adults understood distance. Her explanations were poetic and frustrating, hinting at truths that seemed just beyond the grasp of rational understanding. One day, when Lily was 3 years old, she drew a picture that made Jessica's breath catch. It showed Luna, clearly recognizable despite the childish art style, standing in a forest. But the trees were wrong. Too tall and thin, with leaves that seemed to glow. In the sky above were 2 moons, and scattered throughout the scene were the same symbols that appeared on Luna's collar. When asked about the drawing, Lily simply said it was Luna's home, the place where Luna dreamed about. The drawing was shown to the experts who had been studying the collar, and it reignited interest in solving the mystery. Some of the symbols in Lily's drawing were ones that appeared on the collar, but others were new, filling in gaps in what had seemed like an incomplete message. A linguist who specialized in constructed languages noticed that the symbols, when arranged in the order Lily had drawn them, seemed to tell a story, though the meaning remained elusive. Jacob Bennett, a theoretical physicist who had become interested in the case, proposed a wild theory. He suggested that Luna might have somehow come from a parallel dimension, a world similar to ours, but different in key ways. The metallic object near its heart could be some kind of dimensional anchor, allowing it to exist in our world. The collar might be a message or identification from that other place. It was the kind of theory that sounded like science fiction, but as Jacob pointed out, so did the entire situation. The theory gained some credence when analysis of Luna's DNA revealed more anomalies. While definitely a bear, there were sequences that didn't match any known species. It was as if Luna was a bear from a slightly different evolutionary path, one that had diverged from our world's bears millions of years ago. The implications were staggering, suggesting possibilities that challenged everything science thought it knew about the nature of reality. As Luna continued to grow, reaching the size of an adult bear, the visits with Lily had to become more structured for safety reasons. They could no longer be in direct physical contact, separated now by reinforced glass, but the connection remained strong. They would sit on opposite sides of the barrier, Lily with her hand pressed against the glass, Luna with its massive paw touching the same spot. They still vocalized to each other, their strange shared language evolving as they both matured. The story of Lily and Luna became something of a local legend, inspiring books, documentaries, and endless speculation. Some saw it as proof of the interconnectedness of all living things, others as evidence of mysteries beyond human comprehension. Parents brought their children to the rehabilitation center, hoping to witness the special bond between the girl and the bear. Most were moved by what they saw, even if they couldn't fully understand it. When Lily was 5, old enough to understand more complex ideas, Jessica finally asked her directly, "How did Luna get into that fitting room?" Lily thought for a long moment, her face serious with concentration. Then she said something that sent chills down Jessica's spine. She said Luna had been lost, stuck between places, and had heard Lily calling. Not with her voice, but with her heart. Luna had followed that call and found a door that wasn't usually there, a door that only opened when someone really needed to find it. It was an explanation that made no logical sense, but somehow felt true. Jessica remembered that day, how she had almost not gone shopping, how everything had seemed to conspire to bring them to that exact place at that exact time. Perhaps Lily was right. Perhaps there were doors between worlds that opened only when the need was great enough, when two souls called out to each other across impossible distances. The rehabilitation center eventually built a special facility just for Luna, a massive enclosure that replicated a natural forest environment as closely as possible. It became a research station for studying interspecies communication and the mysteries that Luna represented. Scientists from around the world came to observe and study, though none could fully explain what they witnessed. The bond between Lily and Luna remained at the center of it all, a reminder that not everything in the universe could be measured and categorized. As Lily grew older, she showed remarkable abilities with animals of all kinds. Dogs that were aggressive with everyone else would calm in her presence. Wild birds would land on her outstretched hand. It was as if her early connection with Luna had given her a gift, the ability to communicate with the natural world that others had lost. She said she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, but everyone who knew her suspected she was destined for something even more special. The collar remained with Luna, who refused to let anyone remove it. Over the years, the symbols on it seemed to change subtly. as if telling an evolving story. Photographs taken months apart showed slight differences, new curves in the carved lines, additional marks that hadn't been there before. It was as if the collar was alive, growing and changing along with Luna. Some nights, the staff reported, it would glow faintly in the darkness, pulsing with a light that had no apparent source. Avery Johnson, a documentary filmmaker, spent 2 years following Lily and Luna's story, creating a film that won numerous awards. She captured not just the facts of their unusual meeting, but the emotion of it, the sense of wonder that surrounded their bond. The film ended with a scene of Lily, now 7 years old, sitting by Luna's enclosure at sunset. They weren't vocalizing, just sitting quietly together, comfortable in each other's presence. Avery said later that in that moment, she felt she was witnessing something holy, a connection that transcended the boundaries humans usually put between themselves and the natural world. The mystery deepened when other similar cases began to emerge around the world. A child in Japan who could communicate with dolphins in ways that defied explanation. A boy in Africa who had been found as a toddler living peacefully among a pride of lions. A girl in South America who could call birds from the sky with a song no one else could understand. Each case was unique, but they all shared certain elements: young children, inexplicable bonds with animals, and circumstances that seemed to defy the laws of physics and biology. Some researchers began to wonder if humanity was witnessing the emergence of something new, an evolution not of the body, but of consciousness itself. Perhaps these children represented a new way of being in the world, one that recognized the artificial nature of the boundaries between species. Or perhaps, as others suggested, they were simply remembering something humanity had forgotten, an ancient ability to communicate with the natural world that had been lost in the march toward civilization. Lily never lost her connection with Luna, even as she grew into adolescence, and the normal concerns of teenage life competed for her attention. She would still visit regularly, and their communication continued to evolve. By the time she was 15, Lily could spend hours with Luna without either of them making a sound. Yet both would later report having had deep, meaningful exchanges. When asked to describe these silent conversations, Lily would say they talked about the forest Luna had never seen but somehow remembered, about the family it had never known but still missed, about the home that existed somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. The scientific community remained divided on how to interpret the phenomenon. Some insisted there must be rational explanations for everything, that given enough study, the mysteries would yield to human understanding. Others argued that the very attempt to dissect and analyze the bond between Lily and Luna was missing the point, that some things were meant to be experienced rather than explained. The debate continued in academic journals and conference halls, but for Lily and Luna, none of that mattered. They had each other, and that was enough. Sekou chapters of Part 1 completed. As the years passed, the story of how Luna had appeared in that fitting room became almost mythical in its retelling. Each person who had been there that day remembered it slightly differently, their memories colored by the impossibility of what they had witnessed. Ethan Marshall still ran his clothing boutique, and the fitting room where Luna had been found became something of a shrine. He never renovated it, keeping it exactly as it had been that day. Sometimes customers would ask to see it, and he would tell them the story, watching their faces shift from skepticism to wonder as he showed them the photographs and news clippings he had saved. Jessica found herself changed by the experience in ways she hadn't expected. She became involved in wildlife conservation efforts, using her story to advocate for protecting natural habitats and respecting the intelligence and emotional complexity of animals. She spoke at conferences in schools, always emphasizing that the bond between Lily and Luna wasn't unique because it was impossible, but because it reminded us of connections that should be possible, if only humans could remember how to listen. The Rehabilitation Center established a program inspired by Lily and Luna's bond, bringing together children and rescued wildlife in carefully supervised settings. They found that many children showed remarkable abilities to connect with animals when given the opportunity, though none quite matched the profound connection that Lily and Luna shared. The program helped countless animals recover from trauma and injury, the presence of gentle, empathetic children seeming to accelerate healing in ways that medical treatment alone couldn't achieve. Michael Hayes, the veterinarian who had first examined Luna, dedicated the remainder of his career to studying the medical anomalies the bear presented. The metallic object near Luna's heart continued to baffle him and his colleagues. Advanced imaging techniques revealed it had a complex internal structure, almost like circuitry, but made from materials that didn't match anything in the periodic table. It seemed to pulse in rhythm with Luna's heartbeat, and some speculated it might be what allowed Luna to exist in our world at all, a kind of biological interface between dimensions. Savannah Reed wrote a book about her experiences with Luna, trying to bridge the gap between scientific observation and the ineffable mystery of what she had witnessed. She described how Luna's behavior challenged everything she thought she knew about bear psychology and behavior. The animal showed cognitive abilities that shouldn't have been possible, solving complex problems and demonstrating what could only be described as abstract thinking. Yet it was Luna's emotional intelligence that impressed her most, the way it seemed to understand not just actions but intentions, not just words but feelings. The wooden tag on Luna's collar became the subject of intense study. A team of cryptographers and linguists worked for years trying to decode the symbols, making some progress but never achieving a complete translation. What they did manage to decipher suggested a message or perhaps a poem about journeys between worlds, about bridges built from dreams and necessity. One symbol that appeared repeatedly seemed to represent something like heart calling or soul singing, possibly referring to the connection between Lily and Luna. As Lily entered her 20s, she pursued her childhood dream of working with animals, but in a way no one had anticipated. She became a researcher specializing in interspecies communication, building on her unique experiences to develop new theories about how different forms of consciousness could connect and communicate. Her work was groundbreaking, even if it was sometimes dismissed by more traditional scientists as being too influenced by her personal experiences. Luna, now fully grown and magnificent, remained at the center. It had become something of a celebrity in the animal conservation world, a symbol of the mysteries that still existed in nature. Visitors came from around the world to see the bear with the mysterious collar, the one that had appeared from nowhere and formed an impossible bond with a human child. Luna seemed to understand its role as an ambassador between worlds, remaining calm and dignified even when crowds gathered to observe. The bond between Lily and Luna never weakened, even as the physical distance between them sometimes grew. When Lily went to university, she could only visit during breaks, but she said she could still feel Luna's presence, especially in quiet moments. She would dream of forests she had never seen, of running on 4 legs through landscapes that didn't exist on any map. When she woke from these dreams, she would call the center, and invariably they would report that Luna had been particularly active that night, pacing its enclosure and vocalizing in ways it only did when Lily was somehow present. Connor Adams, who had run the rehabilitation center throughout Luna's residence there, often reflected on how the bear had changed not just the facility, but everyone who worked there. Staff members reported feeling a sense of peace in Luna's presence, a calmness that went beyond what they felt with other animals. Some said that looking into Luna's eyes was like looking into a deep well that reflected not just your image, but your essence. It was unsettling and comforting in equal measure. The center established a research partnership with several universities, studying not just Luna, but the phenomenon it represented. They investigated other cases of anomalous animal appearances, mysterious bonds between species, and unexplained behaviors in wildlife. What they found suggested that Luna's case, while extraordinary, wasn't entirely unique. There seemed to be thin places in the world where the impossible became possible, where the boundaries between realities grew permeable. One researcher proposed that consciousness itself might be the key, that minds reaching out across species barriers could sometimes create bridges that transcended physical laws. It was a theory that sounded more like philosophy than science, but the evidence was hard to dismiss. The connection between Lily and Luna had been documented, recorded, and studied for years, and no conventional explanation could account for all the observed phenomena. As Luna aged, entering what should have been the middle years of a bear's life, it showed no signs of typical aging. Its fur remained glossy, its movements fluid, its eyes bright and alert. The veterinary team monitoring its health noted that its cells showed unusual properties, regenerating at rates that shouldn't have been possible. The metallic object near its heart seemed to be involved somehow, releasing substances into Luna's bloodstream that had remarkable healing properties. Attempts to synthesize these substances had failed, as if they required something beyond mere chemistry to function. Lily, now Dr. Lily Morgan, established her own research institute dedicated to studying interspecies communication and consciousness. She brought together scientists, philosophers, artists, and mystics, creating an interdisciplinary approach to understanding the mysteries that her childhood friend represented. The Institute's work was controversial but influential, pushing the boundaries of what mainstream science was willing to consider. The story of Lily and Luna inspired a generation of children to look at animals differently, to see them not as other but as different expressions of the same fundamental consciousness that animated all life. Environmental movements adopted their story as a symbol of the deep connections between humans and nature that modern life had severed but not destroyed. Artists created works inspired by their bond. Musicians composed symphonies that tried to capture the wordless communication they shared. Logan Carter, the journalist who had first reported on the story, followed it throughout his career. In his final article before retirement, he wrote that the mystery of Luna's appearance in that fitting room had never been solved, and perhaps that was as it should be. Some mysteries, he suggested, weren't meant to be solved, but to be lived with, to remind us that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than we could imagine. The fitting room in Ethan's boutique became a pilgrimage site of sorts. People would come, stand in the small space, and try to feel whatever remained of the magic that had brought Luna into this world. Some claimed to sense something, a thinness in the air, a feeling of possibility. Others felt nothing but were moved nonetheless by standing in the place where the impossible had happened. Ethan himself, now elderly, would still sometimes stand in that fitting room late in the evening when the store was closed. He would remember that rainy Tuesday afternoon when reality had bent and allowed something extraordinary to enter his ordinary world. He kept a photograph on his desk of Lily as a baby, reaching out to touch Luna's nose for the first time, two young souls recognizing each other across an impossible divide. The collar remained with Luna always, its symbols continuing their slow evolution. Scholars studying photographs taken over the decades could track changes, patterns emerging and dissolving like messages written in water. Some believed the collar was telling Luna's story, recording its journey between worlds. Others thought it might be counting down to something, or perhaps counting up, marking time in a way humans couldn't understand. Haley Dawson, who had first recorded the vocalizations between Lily and Luna, went on to revolutionize the field of bioacoustics. She developed new methods for analyzing animal communication, revealing layers of meaning in sounds that had previously been dismissed as mere noise. Her work showed that many species had complex communication systems that humans had simply been unable to perceive. She always credited Lily and Luna as her inspiration, the proof that communication could transcend the barriers humans had assumed were insurmountable. As Luna entered what should have been its senior years, it remained vital and strong. The staff at the center joked that Luna might outlive them all, sustained by whatever force had brought it to this world. The bear had become a living legend, a reminder that there were still mysteries in the world that science couldn't explain, doors between realities that occasionally opened just wide enough for something wonderful to slip through. Lily, now middle-aged herself, continued to visit Luna regularly. Their meetings had taken on an almost ceremonial quality, two old friends sitting together in comfortable silence, sharing thoughts and feelings that no recording device could capture. She would bring her own children, who showed their own remarkable abilities to connect with Luna, though she said the bond was different for each generation, evolving and adapting like a living thing. The rehabilitation center had grown into a major research facility, attracting funding from around the world. The Luna Institute, as it came to be known, studied not just interspecies communication but the nature of consciousness itself, the possibility of parallel dimensions, and the role of emotion and intention in shaping reality. It was a place where the impossible was taken seriously, where mystery was embraced rather than feared. The impact of Luna's story rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. Legislation protecting wildlife became easier to pass when politicians could point to Luna as an example of the intelligence and emotional complexity of animals. Children who had grown up hearing about Lily and Luna became scientists, conservationists, and advocates for a more harmonious relationship between humanity and nature. Some religious and spiritual groups saw in Luna's story evidence of divine intervention, a miracle sent to remind humanity of its connection to all living things. Others saw it as proof that consciousness was the fundamental fabric of reality, that minds could touch across any distance or difference if the need was great enough. The debates were passionate but mostly friendly, united by a shared sense of wonder at what had occurred. As the years turned to decades, the story of Luna's appearance in that fitting room took on the quality of myth, even for those who had witnessed it firsthand. Memory has a way of softening edges, of making the impossible seem like a dream. But the evidence remained: photographs, videos, scientific data, and most importantly, the ongoing presence of Luna itself. A living reminder that sometimes the universe delivers exactly what is needed, even if it arrives in the most unexpected way. The mystery of the collar deepened when archaeologists discovered cave paintings in a remote location that contained symbols identical to those on Luna's wooden tag. The paintings were dated to be over 10,000 years old, suggesting that whatever message the collar carried, it was ancient beyond imagining. This discovery led to new theories about Luna's origin, possibilities that stretched the boundaries of what anyone was willing to believe. Some suggested that Luna was a messenger from a parallel Earth where evolution had taken a slightly different path, where bears had developed higher consciousness and humans had maintained their ability to communicate with nature. Others believed Luna came from our own world's future, sent back for reasons that wouldn't become clear until humanity was ready to understand. The theories grew more elaborate with each passing year, but none could be proven or definitively disproven. Lily's children grew up with Luna as a constant presence in their lives, a godparent of sorts from another species. They showed their own gifts, abilities to understand and communicate with animals that seemed to be hereditary, passed down from their mother like the color of their eyes. The scientific community studied them intensely, trying to understand if this was learned behavior or something more fundamental, a genetic or perhaps epigenetic change triggered by Lily's early experience. The Rehabilitation Center's work with Luna led to breakthroughs in understanding animal cognition and emotion. Studies showed that many species had rich inner lives, complex social structures, and forms of culture that had been invisible to human observation. The old view of animals as biological machines driven by instinct gave way to a recognition of them as conscious beings with their own forms of intelligence and wisdom. As Lily entered her 60s, she began to worry about what would happen to Luna when she was gone. The bear showed no signs of aging, and it seemed possible it might outlive her by decades. She established a foundation to ensure Luna's care in perpetuity, funded by the proceeds from books, documentaries, and research grants that their story had generated. But more than that, she worked to ensure that the next generation understood the importance of the connection they had shared. She wrote a memoir, trying to capture in words what had always existed beyond language. She described the feeling of Luna's mind touching hers, like streams converging into a river. She wrote about the dreams they shared, the forests that existed in no earthly location, the sense of being part of something vast and interconnected that most humans had forgotten how to perceive. The book became a bestseller, touching people who had never heard of Luna before, awakening in them a longing for connections they didn't know they had lost. The fitting room in Ethan's boutique was eventually preserved as a historical site. The store itself had closed years ago when Ethan retired, but the space was maintained exactly as it had been that day. A small museum was created around it, displaying artifacts from Luna's discovery, the old security tag that had injured its paw, photographs from that first day, and recordings of Lily and Luna's early vocalizations. Visitors would stand in the fitting room, some hoping for their own miraculous encounter, others simply wanting to touch a piece of mystery. Scientists continued to study the metallic object in Luna's chest, using new technologies as they were developed. Each advancement in imaging and analysis revealed new layers of complexity. It seemed to be both organic and artificial, grown rather than manufactured, with properties that challenged the boundaries between biology and technology. Some researchers believed it was proof that Luna came from a civilization far more advanced than our own, one that had learned to merge consciousness with matter in ways humans were only beginning to imagine. The symbols on Luna's collar continued to evolve, and pattern recognition algorithms eventually detected that they were changing in response to astronomical events. Certain symbols would alter during eclipses, others during planetary alignments. It was as if the collar was a kind of cosmic clock, keeping time according to celestial rhythms. This discovery led to collaboration with astronomers, who found correlations between the collar's changes and events in deep space that shouldn't have been detectable from Earth. As Lily aged, her visits with Luna took on a different quality. They would sit together for hours, an old woman and an ageless bear, sharing the kind of companionship that needed no words. Staff at the center reported that during these visits, other animals would gather as close as their enclosures allowed, as if drawn by the energy between them. Birds would land on nearby branches and sing, creating spontaneous concerts that had no explanation in normal animal behavior. The impact of their story on human consciousness was studied by philosophers and sociologists. Many credited Lily and Luna with initiating a shift in how humanity saw itself in relation to the natural world. The old paradigm of human dominion over nature gave way to a recognition of partnership, of being one species among many in a living, conscious ecosystem. Environmental policies changed, conservation efforts intensified, and a new generation grew up believing that communication between species was not just possible but essential. Luna's presence at the rehabilitation center had transformed it into a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the deeper mysteries of existence. People came from around the world not just to see Luna, but to experience the sense of possibility that surrounded it. Many reported profound experiences in Luna's presence, healing from trauma, insights into their life's purpose, or simply a deep sense of peace that stayed with them long after they left. The scientific papers published about Luna filled entire library shelves. Studies on its biology, behavior, the collar, the metallic object, and its bond with Lily had advanced multiple fields of science. Yet, for all the research, the fundamental mystery remained. How had a bear cub appeared in a locked fitting room? Where had it come from? Why had it connected so deeply with a human baby? These questions had no answers, only theories that grew more elaborate and fantastic with each passing year. As Lily reached her 70s, she began to have dreams that felt different from any she had experienced before. In these dreams, Luna spoke to her in human language, explaining things she had always wondered about. Luna told her about the place between worlds where it had been lost, a realm where all possibilities existed simultaneously. It explained that Lily's call had created a bridge, a moment of need so pure that reality had bent to accommodate it. Whether these dreams were real communication or simply her aging mind trying to make sense of a lifetime of mystery, Lily couldn't say. She shared these dreams with researchers, who found them consistent with theories about parallel dimensions and quantum consciousness. Some believed Luna existed in multiple realities simultaneously, anchored to our world by its bond with Lily and the mysterious technology in its chest. Others thought the dreams were Lily's subconscious mind, processing information she had absorbed over decades of connection with Luna, creating a narrative that felt like communication. The Rehabilitation Center expanded its research to include studies on human-animal bonds throughout history. They found countless stories, myths, and legends that echoed elements of Lily and Luna's connection. From ancient shamanic traditions to modern accounts of inexplicable animal behavior, there seemed to be a thread running through human history of connections that transcended species boundaries. Luna's story was unique in its documentation and scientific study, but perhaps not in its essence. As news spread that Lily was aging and her visits with Luna were becoming less frequent, people began to gather at the center. They came to witness what many believed might be the end of an era, the conclusion of a story that had captivated the world for decades. But Lily herself seemed at peace with the passage of time. She said she and Luna had shared more than most beings ever could, and that their connection would endure beyond physical presence. On what would be one of her last visits to the center, Lily brought her grandchildren to meet Luna. The bear, still magnificent and showing no signs of its true age, greeted them with the same gentle curiosity it had shown their grandmother so many years ago. The children, raised on stories of Luna, approached without fear, and once again that mysterious communication sparked between young human minds and the ancient consciousness that looked out through Luna's eyes. The visit lasted hours, with Lily sitting quietly while her grandchildren and Luna engaged in their own form of play and communication. Staff members later said there was something final about that day, a sense of completion. Luna seemed to be passing something on to the next generation, ensuring that the bridge between worlds would remain even after its original architects were gone. That night, Lily had the most vivid dream of her life. She was young again, standing in a forest that glowed with an inner light. Luna was there, not as a bear, but as a being of pure consciousness, radiant and beautiful. They spoke without words, understanding flowing between them like light. Luna showed her the path it had traveled to reach our world, the countless realities it had passed through, all to answer the call of a baby's heart seeking a friend. When she woke, Lily knew something had changed. She called the center and learned that Luna had been unusually active all night, vocalizing in patterns they had never heard before. The caller had glowed brighter than ever, pulsing with a rhythm that matched no known pattern. Then, just before dawn, Luna had settled into a peaceful sleep from which it seemed reluctant to wake. Over the following weeks, Luna began to change, not aging or declining, but transforming in subtle ways. Its fur took on a slight luminescence, visible only in certain lights. The metallic object in its chest began to pulse more rapidly, and new symbols appeared on the collar, symbols that seemed to tell of journeys ending and beginning. The staff at the center watched with a mixture of awe and concern, unsure what these changes meant. Lily, now frail but still sharp of mind, made one final visit to the center. She and Luna sat together for hours, not in their usual spot by the viewing window, but in a special enclosure that allowed them to be in the same space one last time. They didn't vocalize or gesture, just sat in perfect stillness, two old friends sharing a silence that contained lifetimes of communication. When it was time for Lily to leave, she placed her hand on Luna's massive head, whispered something no one else could hear, and walked away without looking back. Those who were there said the air itself seemed to shimmer for a moment, as if reality was acknowledging the end of something extraordinary. Luna watched her go, then returned to its den, where it curled up with the now ancient stuffed rabbit that Lily had given it so many years ago. 3 days later, Lily passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her family said she had been at peace, speaking in her final hours about forests of light and the friend who had shown her that love could transcend any boundary. At the exact moment of her passing, witnesses at the rehabilitation center reported that Luna stood, looked toward the sky, and gave a single, long vocalization, unlike anything they had ever heard from it before. Then the bear settled back down, closing its eyes as if entering a deep meditation. In the days that followed Lily's passing, Luna began to fade, not dying in any conventional sense, but becoming less solid, less present in our reality. The collar's symbols rearranged themselves into a final configuration that, when translated, seemed to say something like, "Journey complete, door closing, gratitude eternal." The metallic object in Luna's chest pulsed with increasing intensity, creating a sound like a heartbeat that could be felt more than heard. 1 week after Lily's death, staff arriving at the center in the morning found Luna's enclosure empty. There was no breach in the fencing, no way the bear could have escaped. Security footage showed Luna simply fading away over the course of the night, becoming translucent and then transparent before disappearing entirely. The only things left behind were the collar, now just ordinary carved wood with no mysterious properties, and Lily's stuffed rabbit carefully placed where Luna used to sleep. The disappearance of Luna made international news, reigniting all the old debates about what Luna had been and where it had come from. Scientists studied the collar, now inert and ordinary, finding only the kind of wood and fiber that could be found in any forest. The metallic object that had been in Luna's chest was never found, having apparently vanished along with the bear. Some said Luna had returned to wherever it had come from, its purpose in our world complete. The rehabilitation center created a memorial for both Lily and Luna, a peaceful garden where their story was told through sculptures and plantings. The garden became a place of reflection, where people came to think about the mysteries of consciousness, the bonds between species, and the possibility that reality was far more fluid than most believed. Children would leave drawings of bears and babies, flowers for Lily, and honey for Luna, even though Luna was no longer there to enjoy it. Lily's children and grandchildren carried on her work, maintaining the institute she had founded and continuing research into interspecies communication. They said they could sometimes feel Luna's presence, especially when working with animals that seemed to have that special gift for connection. The abilities that had manifested in Lily's line continued into the next generation, suggesting that her encounter with Luna had changed something fundamental in her genetic or spiritual heritage. The fitting room where it all began was eventually enclosed in glass, preserved as a monument to mystery. A plaque beside it read simply, "Here, the impossible happened. Here, two souls found each other across the vastness of space and species. Here, we learned that love knows no boundaries." Visitors would press their hands against the glass, hoping to feel some echo of the magic that had once filled that small space. Scientists continued to study the data collected over Luna's lifetime, finding new patterns and correlations with each analysis. The vocalizations between Lily and Luna, when subjected to advanced AI analysis, revealed a complexity that suggested not just communication, but the creation of an entirely new form of language, one that bridged the gap between human and animal consciousness. This discovery led to breakthroughs in understanding how consciousness itself might be structured. The story of Lily and Luna became required reading in many schools, not as science or history but as philosophy, as an example of the kinds of connections that were possible when beings approached each other with open hearts and minds. Children grew up knowing that once, a bear and a baby had been best friends, had shared dreams and conversations, had proven that the boundaries between species were constructs that love could dissolve. Religious scholars found in the story echoes of ancient teachings about the unity of all life. Some saw Luna as an angel in animal form, sent to remind humanity of its place in the greater web of existence. Others interpreted the story through the lens of reincarnation, suggesting that Lily and Luna had known each other in previous lives and had found a way to reunite despite being born into different species. The mystery of Luna's origin was never solved, and perhaps that was its greatest gift to humanity. In an age where science seemed capable of explaining everything, Luna remained inexplicable, a reminder that mystery and wonder were still possible. The various theories about parallel dimensions, time travel, divine intervention, or quantum consciousness all had their adherents, but none could be proven. Luna had come from mystery and returned to mystery, leaving only the certainty that it had been real. Years passed, and the story of Lily and Luna took on the quality of legend. New generations heard it with the same wonder that children had once reserved for fairy tales. Except this fairy tale was true, documented and verified. The Rehabilitation Center became a research institution dedicated to studying consciousness and communication across all forms of life. The work done there led to revolutionary changes in how humanity related to the natural world. Sometimes, staff at the center reported strange occurrences. Animals would gather in Luna's old enclosure and vocalize in patterns reminiscent of the sounds Luna used to make. Children visiting the center would sometimes point to empty spaces and claim to see a bear, describing Luna perfectly despite never having seen photographs. These incidents were documented but never explained, adding new chapters to a mystery that seemed to have no end. The collar Luna left behind was eventually placed in a museum, where it was studied and admired but never fully understood. The symbols that had once shifted and changed were now fixed, telling a story that no one could completely decipher. Some visitors claimed that if they looked at it in just the right light, at just the right angle, they could see it shimmer slightly, as if it remembered what it had once been. Lily's descendants continued to show remarkable abilities with animals, and some of them reported dreams of Luna, dreams where the bear told them stories of other worlds and other possibilities. Whether these were genuine communications or simply the power of family mythology, they kept the connection alive across generations. The children who had these dreams often grew up to be innovators in fields related to consciousness, communication, and conservation. The impact of Lily and Luna's story on human civilization was studied by historians who traced changes in environmental policy, animal rights legislation, and scientific paradigms back to that rainy Tuesday when a bear cub appeared in a fitting room. It was as if their meeting had been a catalyst, triggering a shift in human consciousness that rippled outward in waves, changing how humanity saw itself and its place in the living world.